At my mother-in-law's retirement gala, an event I had designed, funded, and coordinated down to the last centerpiece, I discovered my name had been removed from every program, every placard, and every thank you card. My husband laughed it off as a printing oversight. 40 minutes later, the catering team walked out, the floral installations were dismantled, and the custom lighting rig I had personally contracted went dark. The room full of Charleston's finest watched the Hargrove family scramble in real time, and I stood at the back of that ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in my hand, and felt, for the first time in 6 years, completely free. Let me back up. My name is Sloan. Wait, let me start over, because that's not how I usually introduce myself. For most of my adult life, I introduced myself as my husband's wife first, myself second. That's the thing nobody tells you about marrying into a family like the Hargroves. You don't just marry a person, you marry a hierarchy, and you start at the bottom regardless of what you bring through the door. What I brought through the door was considerable. I was 31 when I met my husband at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital of Charleston. I had spent the previous decade building a boutique event production company from nothing. No family connections, no investors, just a business degree from Clemson, a maxed-out credit card, and a stubborn refusal to quit. By the time I met him, my company handled corporate galas, charity functions, and private events for some of the most prominent families in the Lowcountry. I had a staff of 8. I had a reputation. I had a waiting list. He was charming in the specific way of men who have never had to try very hard at anything. Easy smile. Good manners. The kind of confidence that comes not from achievement, but from never once having been told no. He was the youngest son of the Hargrove family, old Charleston money, the kind rooted in real estate and law firms, and the sort of quiet influence that doesn't need to advertise itself. When he introduced me to his mother at a dinner 3 months into our relationship, she looked me over the way you look at a piece of furniture you're not sure will match the room. "You're the party planner," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. How resourceful. I should have clocked that. I didn't. We were engaged 11 months after we met. The wedding was, naturally, the social event of the season. I planned most of it myself, which in retrospect was a form of madness, because it meant I spent our engagement managing vendors and seating charts while my mother-in-law made editorial comments from the sidelines. The flowers weren't traditional enough. The venue, a restored Reconstruction-era mill I had secured after months of negotiation, was eccentric. She wanted the club. I held firm on the mill. My husband told me to pick my battles. What he meant was, lose gracefully. After the wedding, things didn't get worse exactly. They got more defined. My mother-in-law had a gift for making her preferences feel like objective facts, and her preferences were clear. I was a useful appendage, good at what I did in the way a reliable appliance is good at what it does, but not someone whose judgment warranted respect, or whose presence warranted acknowledgement. At family dinners, my opinions were solicited and then redirected. At social functions, my work was admired and then credited to the family's vision. At holidays, I was included in the room but excluded from the conversation. My husband saw none of it, or chose not to. He'd grown up in that water. He didn't know it was anything other than the temperature things were supposed to be. The retirement gala was supposed to be different. My mother-in-law was stepping down after 30 years as the chair of the Hargrove Family Foundation, a nonprofit that had become central to her identity and her social standing in Charleston. The gala would be her send-off, a celebration of her legacy, attended by the governor's office, 3 senators, and what felt like half the donor rolls of the Southeast. It was the biggest event the Hargrove family had ever attempted, and my mother-in-law, to her credit, knew she needed someone who actually knew what they were doing. She asked me to handle it, not through my company, mind you. She made that distinction carefully. She wanted me to manage it as family, which I understood to mean she wanted my expertise without the invoice. I agreed, because I was still trying to belong. I spent 4 months on that gala. I called in every professional favor I had. I negotiated rates my actual clients paid 3 times over. I designed the entire program, the room transformation, the catering concept, the audiovisual production, the tribute video, the custom floral work, the guest gift experience. I handled every vendor contract, every insurance certificate, every timeline, every contingency. My own company's credit line secured the deposits because the foundation's accounts, I was told, were tied up in end-of-fiscal processes. My husband said his father would reimburse me before the event. I didn't push. I should have pushed. 3 weeks before the gala, I was reviewing the printed programs. The graphic designer had sent me the proofs, and I was working through them at the kitchen table when I noticed the event credits on the inside back cover. The catering. The florals. The production company. The audiovisual team, each one listed. My name was not. In its place, event coordination provided by the Hargrove Family Foundation. I told myself it was a draft error. I flagged it, sent the correction, moved on. But something had shifted in my chest. A small, cold thing that I couldn't quite ignore. 2 weeks before the gala, my husband's phone was on the counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to be clear about that. I was walking past it to get coffee when it lit up with a message from someone I didn't recognize. A woman's name. A message that was brief and specific and made my stomach drop like an elevator with a cut cable. Can we talk before the gala? I don't want things to be weird. She's gonna find out eventually anyway. I stood there in my kitchen in my robe, holding a coffee mug, reading that sentence 4 times. Then I put the mug down. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and thought very carefully about what I knew and what I didn't know and what I was going to do with either. I didn't say a word to him. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept working. I confirmed the linens. I finalized the seating for 312 guests. I walked the venue 4 times. I was professional and calm and thorough, and every single day I was quietly building a different kind of file. The financial documents weren't hard to find once I started looking. My husband managed the household accounts. I had access. What I found there and in the briefcase he sometimes left open in his home office told a story that the charming exterior had been working hard to obscure. The investment firm he co-ran with his brother had been bleeding for 2 years. There were loans against properties I hadn't known were leveraged. There were withdrawals to accounts I didn't recognize. The money he'd promised to reimburse me before the gala, it wasn't there. It had never been there. I photographed everything. I forwarded copies to a personal email account and then to my attorney, a woman I'd known since law school, who I called from my car in a parking garage so my husband wouldn't hear. "How much did you put in?" she asked. I told her. There was a pause. "Okay," she said. "Don't move any money. Don't say anything. Let me look at this." The night of the gala, I wore a navy silk dress I'd bought before my marriage. Back when I bought things because I liked them rather than because they'd photograph well at family events. I did my own makeup. I drove myself to the venue early, the way I always did, because good events don't run themselves in the final hour. The venue was a historic mansion on the Battery that I'd transformed into something genuinely beautiful. Candlelight everywhere. Custom floral arches in cream and dusty rose. The tribute video playing on a seamless screen behind the stage. Tables dressed in ivory with gold accents. It was, objectively, the best work I had ever done. I walked through it alone, before the guests arrived, and I felt a particular quiet pride of someone who has made something real. Then I picked up the printed program from one of the tables and turned to the back. Event coordination provided by the Hargrove Family Foundation. Same as the draft, my correction had not been made. I stood there for a moment, then I went and found the venue coordinator, my contact there, a woman I'd worked with on 3 previous events. and asked her quietly who had instructed the change. She hesitated. "I got an email 2 days ago," she said, "from the foundation's executive director. She said the family wanted to keep the credits internal." The executive director reported to my mother-in-law. I thanked her. I walked to a quiet corner near the kitchen corridor, and I called my catering contact, a man I had worked with for 9 years, who had given me favorable rates on this event specifically because of our history. "Hey," I said, "I need to talk to you about the contract before service starts." He stepped away from his team. "What's up?" "The foundation hasn't reimbursed my deposits," I said, "and I have reason to believe they won't. I'm pulling my personal guarantee on tonight's service." His voice shifted. "What does that mean for?" "It means the balance due tonight is on them, not me. I can't cover it. I wanted you to know before service began, because you deserve to know, and because you deserve to know, and because you can decide how you want to handle it." He was quiet for a moment. "The number they have on file is yours?" "It's my company's, which means if this doesn't get paid, it comes back to me. And I can't let it." I made 4 more calls in the next 20 minutes. The floral designer, the production company, the lighting vendor, the custom gift experience coordinator. Each one of them had my company listed as the contracting entity. Each one of them had an outstanding balance due on completion that had not been pre-authorized by the Hargrove Family Foundation. Each one of them deserved to know. I didn't tell them to leave. I told them the situation and left the decision to them. I went to the bathroom, touched up my lipstick, and walked out to take my place near the entrance, just as the first guests began arriving. My husband found me 20 minutes later. He was already in event mode. The bright smile, the handshake grip, the easy laughter that made rooms like him on contact. He kissed my cheek and said the room looked incredible. "Thank you," I said. "I worked hard on it." He didn't notice anything in my voice. He rarely did. For the first hour, everything appeared to be fine. Cocktails circulated. Guests mingled. My mother-in-law arrived in a champagne gown and accepted the room's attention with the graciousness of someone who had been practicing for exactly this moment her entire life. She did not thank me. She thanked the foundation board. She thanked the staff. She thanked her family, which produced a general sweep of her arm toward my husband and his brother and their wives. I was standing 12 feet away. She did not look at me. The trouble started quietly, the way real trouble usually does. I saw my catering contact speak to the venue manager. I saw the venue manager make a call. I saw my husband's older brother, who handled the family's financial accounts, excuse himself from a conversation and take out his phone with a frown. By the time the cocktail hour ended and guests were moving toward their tables, the catering team had paused. Not visibly, not dramatically. They simply stopped bringing things out. The servers stood near the kitchen door, neutral-faced, waiting. My brother-in-law appeared at my elbow. "What did you do?" he said quietly, his jaw tight. "I removed my personal financial guarantee from tonight's vendor contracts," I said. "Since the foundation never reimbursed my deposits, I couldn't responsibly continue to carry the liability." "You can't do this. Not tonight. Do you know who is in that room?" "I know exactly who is in that room," I said. "I built the guest list." He left to find my husband. I watched him go. Then I checked my phone. My attorney had responded to the documents I'd forwarded. "This is enough. Don't sign anything. Call me tomorrow morning." My husband reached me in 4 minutes. His smile was still in place, but his eyes were doing something different. "We need to fix this right now," he said very quietly. "People are going to notice." "They already have," I said. "The lighting crew is waiting on authorization too, so is Florals for the breakdown. I'll write a check tonight." "The accounts are overdrawn," I said. "I've seen the statements." His face changed then. The smile dropped away completely for the first time in 6 years. I could see him recalibrating, trying to figure out what I knew and how I knew it and what that meant for the script he'd been running. "We can talk about this later," he said. "Please, just fix this." "I already did," I said. "I fixed it by protecting myself, which I should have done a long time ago." I walked away from him and through the ballroom, past 300 guests in formal wear looking with polite confusion at tables that had no food on them, past my mother-in-law standing very still in her champagne gown with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something close to genuine uncertainty, and out through the side doors into the evening air. The Battery stretched out in front of me, the harbor dark and quiet. I stood at the railing and breathed. My phone rang. I didn't answer it. It rang again. I watched the screen. When my mother-in-law called, I picked up. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice shaking in a way I had never heard, "what you have done to this family?" "I have a very good idea," I said. The same way I had a very good idea about the floral budget and the catering timeline and the tribute video that took me 60 hours to produce and the vendor relationships I built over a decade that made tonight possible. I had a good idea about all of it. I just wasn't given credit for any of it. "This is not the time." "You removed my name from the program," I said, "from every printed piece, from the venue credits. You made a decision that what I built belonged to the family, not to me, and you didn't tell me. You never told me. That's been the pattern for 6 years." "You're being hysterical." "I'm being accurate," I said. "There's a difference. Good night." I hung up. I found a quiet bench near the water and sat there for a while as the calls continued and eventually slowed. When the texts started, I read them at a remove, the way you read about weather in a city you've already left. "My brother-in-law, you're going to regret this. My sister-in-law, this is so embarrassing. I hope you're proud of yourself. My husband, please call me, please. I can explain about Dara. I can explain everything." Dara. So now I had a name. I forwarded his message to my attorney along with the others. Then I requested a car, and I rode back to the house I had lived in for 6 years, and I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning making a list of what was mine and what was not. By the time my husband came home, I had moved to the guest room and locked the door. I heard him stand outside it for a long moment. Then I heard him go. The next morning, the story moved through the donor community the way stories do in tight social circles, faster than anyone intended, and with details that grew more specific with each telling. 300 guests had witnessed the Hargrove Foundation's retirement gala come quietly apart. The governor's representative had left early. 2 board members had asked pointed questions about the foundation's operational accounts. By noon, my husband's brother was fielding calls from the family's financial advisor. My attorney called me at 9. "Are you ready to talk?" she said. "I've been ready," I said. What followed was not dramatic, not the way films suggest these things are dramatic. It was paperwork and phone calls and a mediation session in a beige conference room where my husband looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. The Hargroves wanted the financial documents I had forwarded to my attorney. They wanted assurances I wouldn't speak to anyone. They wanted things quiet. I wanted 3 things: fair compensation for 6 years of unpaid event work performed for the family and the foundation, documented and valued by a neutral third party, a clean divorce with no claim on my company, which had been built before our marriage and had remained in my name throughout, and an acknowledgement, in writing, that the work for the retirement gala had been performed by my company under my direction. The acknowledgement was the one that took longest. My mother-in-law found it the most difficult, but she signed it because the alternative, a prolonged dispute that would require financial disclosures the family was not in a position to make public, was worse. I was back in my own apartment, a place I'd rented 3 weeks into the process with money from my own business account. By the end of the summer, it was smaller than the house on the Battery. The windows looked out over a parking lot. I painted the kitchen a color I'd been wanting to paint something for years and never had, because it wasn't the family's aesthetic. I hung things on the walls that I liked. My company took on 2 new clients that fall, both of whom had been at the gala. One of them told me at our first meeting that she'd always thought my work was extraordinary and had wanted to hire me for years, but assumed I didn't take outside clients because I was always working for the Hargroves. I told her I had recently opened my calendar. My husband married Dara the following spring. I learned this from someone who saw the announcement and sent it to me more out of surprise than malice. I felt less than I expected to. A kind of distant acknowledgement, like noticing a weather system in a region you relocated from. I hoped, in the abstract way you hope for people who have hurt you without meaning to become better people, that he would be more honest with her than he had been with me. I didn't send a gift. On the anniversary of the gala, I was in Savannah setting up for a corporate dinner, 7 courses, 400 guests, a converted cotton warehouse I'd spent weeks preparing, standing on the empty floor an hour before service, looking at the light moving across tables I had dressed by hand. I understood something I hadn't been able to name clearly before. The Hargroves had spent 6 years trying to make me smaller, and what they'd actually done was show me exactly how much space I was capable of filling. The missing credit line on that program wasn't an oversight. It was a statement about how they saw me. What they didn't account for was that I had always known exactly who I was. I just needed them to make their position clear enough that I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't noticed. I raised my glass, sparkling water, same as that night on the Battery, and drank a quiet toast to the woman who had walked out of that ballroom and not looked back. I used to think that staying quiet was the same thing as being patient, that absorbing the small indignities, the redirected credit, the erased name, the seat at the table that was always somehow slightly removed from the rest, was a form of grace. I told myself I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was handing people a permission slip to keep going. The night of that gala, standing on the Battery with the harbor dark in front of me and my phone lighting up with messages I wasn't going to answer, I understood something I'd been circling for years. The consequences we experience in life are rarely random. They are almost always the accumulated weight of choices, ours and other people's, finally arriving at the address they were always headed for. My mother-in-law made a choice every time she said the family's vision instead of my name. My husband made a choice every time he told me to pick my battles instead of picking a side. Those choices added up, and eventually they landed. What I did that night wasn't impulsive. That's the part I want to be honest about, because it would be easier and more satisfying to frame it as a spontaneous act of courage. It wasn't. It was the result of months of paying attention, of documenting carefully, of understanding exactly what authority I held, and what levers I could pull. The intelligence, the clear-eyed reading of a situation that most people would rather not see clearly. That was the part that made the difference. I had the information. I had built the relationships. I had my name on every contract. They assumed I would continue to carry the weight because I always had. They didn't consider that I might one day put it down. But intelligence alone doesn't move you. I had understood the dynamics of that family for years before I did anything about it. What finally shifted was something harder to name, a refusal, quiet but absolute, to continue accepting a version of myself that other people had decided was sufficient. That refusal is not something anyone can give you. It is not something a book can install. It grows, slowly, out of every time you held your ground on something small, every time you built something real with your own hands, every time you looked in the mirror and recognized yourself. I had been building that refusal for 30 years without knowing it was what I was building. And then there is the question of what you do with it once you have it, because the choices you make when you finally have the power to act, those reveal your character more clearly than anything. I did not destroy my mother-in-law's evening out of spite. I withdrew my own resources from a situation that had never respected them. There is a difference, and I believe it matters. I left room for dignity. Mine and, if they wanted it, theirs. What they chose to do with that room was up to them. 6 months later, standing in a converted warehouse in Savannah with 400 guests about to walk through the door, I thought about what I would tell a younger version of myself if I could. Not advice exactly, just this. The life that fits you is almost never the one someone else designed. And the most honest thing you can do, for yourself and, in the long run, for everyone around you, is to stop pretending the one that doesn't fit is close enough. I raised my glass to no one in particular. The room looked exactly the way I had imagined it would. That was enough.